Welcome to our conversation on family separation on immigrant families by the federal government. I'm Richard Pena, Vice President of the ABA section on Civil Rights and Social Justice Immigration Committee. We're pleased today to be joined by Lee Gelernt, who is the Deputy Director of the ACLU's National Immigration Project in New York, and he is mentioned as one of the top family separation lawyers in the country, if not the top one. Lee, welcome and thank you for agreeing to be with us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. As background, we're in the middle of what President Trump describes as the largest deportation of immigrants in the U.S. history. As we speak, immigrants are being rounded up in cities, workplaces, near churches and schools, and 1,500 troops have been deployed to the southern border. And the Trump administration is also attempting to end the constitutional rights of birthplace citizens. The Trump plan, according to NBC News, is to build immigration detention centers and drastically expand prisons. White House border czar Tom Homan says the gloves are off. Intertwined in all of this is the separation of families and the separation of children from their parents. But before we begin our conversation, let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Lee is a frequent guest on national news programs, speaking on immigration rights, including NBC, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, PBS, and CBS 60 Minutes. In fact, I saw him not too long ago on television. He also was a lead counsel in the case of Miss L versus ICE. We'll get to that in a minute, but he's argued dozens of groundbreaking civil rights cases, including before the Supreme Court and most, if not every, federal Court of Appeals case in the country. Now, the case, I mentioned the case of Miss L versus ICE. That's where the court declared unconstitutional the Trump administration practice of separating immigrant families at the border. For his work on Miss L case, he was the subject of the documentary entitled The Flight. Lee's a graduate of Columbia Law School, where he was the editor of the Law Review, and he is now adjunct professor of the law school. And he has testified as an expert witness before the Senate and House. Lee, it's a pleasure having you, and thank you for agreeing again to participate. And it's our honor, actually, to have you. But before we begin on the current mass deportation situation, I want to talk briefly about child separation in Trump 1.0. That's the last time that President Trump was president. Now, as a background, in 2018, Attorney General Sessions announced a zero tolerance policy. And as a result, the government separated more than 2,000 children from their families. Lee was very much involved in this. And Lee, can you talk to us about the zero tolerance policy, the efforts of you and your team in that process?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Richard. And I want to thank you and the ABA for continuing to shine a light on that case, because for one thing, we don't want it to ever happen again. But right now, it's not even over. The effects of it are not over. So I'm happy that you're asking about it. As an initial matter, I think since we've last talked, we now know that there were probably 6,000 children who were separated, hundreds of whom were just babies and children, some as young as 6 months old. And so, as you know, what happened was the Trump administration was separating families in 2017, 2018. We went into court and we got an injunction. The federal district court called it brutal. What was happening, the Trump administration not only was separating these children, but not keeping records. And so we got an injunction. The court said, I want all these families reunified. And so we've been working ever since to get them reunified with our partners. We entered into an agreement with the Biden administration, a binding consent decree that was, ordered by the court. Unfortunately, at the moment, we think there may still be 1,000 little children who are not with their parents. And I think probably most people in the public don't realize that. And the reason we haven't been able to reunify them all is because we can't find all the families, again, because the Trump administration did not keep records. So we are still working to reunify all these families. And then beyond that, we want to get them the benefits of the settlement we entered into with the Biden administration, which is that they can be reunified with their children in the U.S. and get work authorization. They can get what's called parole to allow them to remain in the country for 3 years, and that's renewable for another 3 years. And maybe most importantly, a specialized asylum process. So hopefully they're not removed again from the country and re-separated. And in addition, housing and health benefits as well. So we are going to be monitoring very closely that the Trump administration adheres to that policy. Otherwise, we'll be back in court. The court retained jurisdiction over the case. And we're also going to be making sure the Trump administration doesn't try and do family separation again. The settlement specifically bars another zero tolerance policy, but we are concerned that they may try and do it under the radar. And so we're going to need people to let us know if they're seeing that. And the court orders say that they have to let us know about that, but we'll see. So I think there's a lot going on, but our immediate attention is going to be trying to get these 1,000 or more children reunited, and making sure people get these specialized asylum procedures who we have found so they can stay in the country. And as you and I have talked about before, Richard, this was just unbelievably brutal. That the aggregate statistics tell one story, the 6,000 kids separated, but it's the stories of each individual kid that are really what this is about. And I've been doing this work now more than 3 decades, and this is by far the worst thing I've ever seen. And the stories are just horrendous. We had one mother tell us about an 18-month-old child she had. They came and said, "We're taking your child," put the child in the back seat of the car. She had to put the child in the back seat of the car. The child was screaming. They wouldn't let her comfort the child. When the car is pulling away, she could see her little baby craning his neck to get one last glimpse of her as the car pulled away. Another family told us about a 4-year-old who wore glasses, and the family was from very modest means, and they were able to buy them the glasses for their son and also buy a glasses case. But when they came to take away the 4-year-old child, he was wearing his glasses, fortunately, but he didn't have his glasses case. They didn't let the mother get the glasses case. So all day long, all the mother would think about is, can my little boy see? What if his glasses break? Will they get him a new pair of glasses? Will they show him where to put his glasses at night so they don't break? Another father told us about a 7-year-old boy who they were going to come and take away. And he just asked the guards, "Can I have 1 minute to brace my son before they take him away?" They didn't give him that 1 minute. His son was screaming and begging, "Don't let them take me," holding onto his father's leg when they dragged him away. And even after reunification, the trauma has been so deep-seated that kids just don't get over it. A 3-year-old boy we helped get reunited would just stand by the window after he was home, looking to see if men were going to come and take him away again. 4-year-old boy scared to go to sleep at night because when he went to sleep, that's when the men came to take him away. And the parent-child relationship being so damaged. The first thing my father told us children would often say when they came home is, "Mommy, Daddy, why did you let them take me? Didn't you love me enough to keep me? Why didn't you fight for me?" Children being too young, obviously, to understand that their parents were helpless to stop it. So we are still dealing with this. We're going to have to monitor it very closely. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has never fully taken responsibility. They have denied that they had a family separation policy, even though it's obvious they did, even though the court has found that they did, even though there are documents showing they did, and they've certainly never acknowledged all the harm they did to these children. So for that reason, we're going to be monitoring very closely what happens going forward and going back to court immediately as necessary.
Lee, your observation about the psychological effect on children from being separated is supported by studies I've been reading recently, where they The studies say they suffered PTSD, depression, and some of this is lifelong. Um,
Yeah.
a couple of questions, because last time we talked, I think you were telling me that the government hid some of the children from you guys when you were trying to locate them.
So to begin with, the government didn't have really clear records of where the parents were, where the children were, who went with who. And so the reunification process was really a nightmare. As the judge said, it seemed like the federal government kept better records of property than they did children. So we don't know if the government was actually hiding the children and parents, but what they were doing is not providing the records of how many families they separated. So you're absolutely right, Richard. So when the court ordered the reunification, they gave us an initial list of about 2,600 families. It then turned out, and so whether hiding is the right word, maybe it is, after an internal investigation, it was turned out that there were thousands more who had been separated that the Trump administration hadn't told us about. So in that sense, yes, I think maybe they weren't hiding the actual children, but they were hiding the lists of the children. So I think you're absolutely right, probably to characterize it that way, that they were not forthcoming in all the lists, and that every time they would always provide the judge with an excuse of, well, we didn't know you wanted that list, or we didn't know you wanted the families who had already been, the parent already been deported. So yeah, and I think we're still finding out that there may have been more families. That's why in the beginning of this program, I said that there may be as many as 6,000 now separated.
And I remember us talking about, I was really impressed about, was it your team that you guys went to Central America? You had a steering committee that was trying to locate these folks?
Yeah, so what happened was that in the initial phases of the case, when the government handed over the 2,600 names, about 470 of them were families where the parent had already been deported and the child was in the US, and the Trump administration took the position in court that those families shouldn't be part of the case because the parent had already been deported. The judge rightly said, well, of course they're part of the case. They had their children taken away. And in fact, they're in a worse situation because they're worrying about their child from a foreign country now. So then the Trump administration said, well, we're not going to go find them. So I stood up in court and said, well, we will find them and we will get volunteers to help us find them. And we're not just going to leave these children as orphans, essentially. So we formed a steering committee with the law firm, headed by the law firm Paul Weiss out of New York, and 3 great NGOs, Kids in Need of Defense, commonly known as KIND, the Women's Refugee Commission, and a group called Justice in Motion that operated with human rights defenders in Central America. So our team went to Central America, but principally it was the Justice in Motion human rights defenders who did the searching in Central America. We tried to find as many families as we could through phone calls, radio ads, posters everywhere. But ultimately, because there weren't clear records of who was deported or where they were deported to, the Justice in Motion human rights defenders had to do real, sort of investigative work on the ground, going from town to town, looking for the parents.
How successful were you?
So we've been amazingly successful. We have found thousands of parents. Unfortunately, we haven't found every family yet, but what I always say when I'm asked, are you going to find them all? I just say, we're not going to stop trying. And I'm confident that sooner or later we'll find every family, but I certainly know we won't give up.
I think it's a good time to play the trailer of the documentary Separated. And for the audience, it's an NBC studio production, and it's based on correspondent Nate Siberoff's book. It's an MSNBC film that aired in late last year, 2024. It's a powerful film. It talks about the children that still are not reunited and the government's role. And Lee is very prominent in not only the trailer, but in the film. And Lee will talk on the other side. So let's go ahead and play the trailer.
Separation from your parent is a profoundly traumatizing event. But systematic separation of children from parents, officially, it wasn't happening. But it was happening.
You should tell me how you got involved in all of this.
Define all this.
Their version of stopping people from coming into the country was taking children away from their parents so that people wouldn't come.
Our field staff started to notice very young kids, tender age, anyone below 5. That's kind of unusual, right?
What Zero Tolerance did was turn their helpers into their worst nightmare.
So if you thought the child was
routinely,
endangered,
sure,
that's
right.
the only circumstance to which you would separate.
Can't imagine doing it otherwise.
The government thought that showing the world separations through the eyes of people like me, they would scare the out of people that were attempting to come from coming.
Is that the right strategy?
So if you're part of a family and you break the law, you will be incarcerated.
I've honestly never seen anything like that. There are about 1,500 kids in there.
You're a parent. Don't you have any empathy for what they go through?
We now know this was right from the get-go. Someone must have been planning this.
A federal judge says the government needs to reunite young immigrant children with their parents.
We had 14 days to reunify all of the children under 5.
Their assessment form in the system doesn't have that much information. What's your mom's name? Mom? Like every mom, their name is Mom.
Do I call this child abuse? Do I call it torture?
Separation was the purpose. Prosecution was the tool.
It's not over. 5 years later, we are still trying to reunite up to 1,000 children.
There is really nothing to stop that.
This is a new era.
It troubles me profoundly that it could happen again.
Where are we now with before we go on to today, where are we with all these kids, all these children? I think you've told us that you found a lot of them, and you're still looking for others?
Yeah, so we're still looking for other families to reunite, and we are going to try and get the families who have been reunited all the benefits under the settlement, most importantly, a chance to apply for asylum and remain in the United States permanently.
I'm going to now turn to Trump 2.0. Let's talk about today a little bit. Our head has been spinning, everybody's head has been spinning with executive orders that are being issued every day from the president's office. And a couple of days ago, I heard one of our U.S. senators or representatives who they asked what's the most important order, and he said the immigrant situation, the deportation of immigrants is he felt the most important. Can you give us an overview of Trump's executive orders dealing with the border and asylum?
Yeah. Do we have 6 or 7 days? Right.
Yeah.
Right. As you said, they're coming sort of fast and furious, and they're really extraordinary in their reach and their claims to authority. So at the border, we have what's called the 212F invasion proclamation. And what that says is immigrants who are arriving at the southern border, including asylum seekers, constitute an invasion of the United States, which we strongly disagree with, obviously, as a practical matter and also as a legal matter within the Constitution. This is not an invasion by a foreign country. What that proclamation does is say, we will not let anybody in, and there's no asylum whatsoever. So that means no asylum for people who cross between ports or try to present legally at a port. It's really an extraordinary measure to say the United States will no longer screen people for asylum, no matter how much danger they're in, no matter if they're families, no matter if they're being persecuted because of their religion or political opinion. And the claimed authority for that is extraordinary. In the past, even President Trump has said, well, we're going to restrict asylum, but we're going to do it in a way that's consistent with the laws Congress has passed on asylum. What's remarkable about this new proclamation is that the proclamation says we don't care what Congress has done with asylum. we think the president has authority to override all those laws in the Immigration Act under his Section 212F authority and also his constitutional authority. And so this is the first time any president has ever asserted that he has this authority simply to override what Congress has done with asylum. So I think it raises two really, really far-reaching questions. You know, one is separation of powers question. Can the president unilaterally declare an invasion and simply say all the asylum laws are wiped out? The second thing is obviously not a question, but just you know, the practical impact. I think we're going to see thousands of people, including families with young children, sent back to persecution or torture. So the impact is just going to be absolutely devastating, as well as obviously the legal questions it raises. Because if we have, the ACLU and other groups have sued over this, if this lawsuit, you know, if the president prevails in this lawsuit, it will mean that any president going forward can simply declare an invasion anytime they want and override all of our asylum laws. So it's very, very dangerous. In addition to what's going on at the border, we obviously see stuff going on in the interior. We're seeing lots of raids with, you know, they're claiming it's only the most serious criminals are being picked up, but we know that there are a lot of collateral arrests, and that's inevitable because they're putting quotas in saying that, you know, officials should try and make 1,200 arrests every period. That's obviously going to only happen if they're making collateral arrests of families and people without criminal convictions. They're also trying to eliminate due process. They've put into place what's called expedited removal in the interior. It's a process where they can engage in deportations without any due process whatsoever. That was historically only used at the border, and now President Trump is trying to use it in the interior. What it means is anybody who can't prove they've been in the country longer than 2 years could be removed with 24 hours later based solely on a supervisor's signature. So people are going to have to carry around utility bills and other kinds of documents to show they've been here longer than 2 years if they want to avoid this expedited removal process. Obviously, what's gotten a lot of attention is the birthright citizenship executive order saying that unless your parent is a lawful permanent resident or a citizen, your child, even if born on U.S. soil, is no longer going to be a citizen. And that really strikes at fundamental values of the United States and is, in our view, flatly inconsistent with the 14th Amendment saying that children born on U.S. soil, regardless of their parents' status, are citizens. And so the number of things they've done is just enormous, and they're going to go after cities, what they call sanctuary cities, and cut funding. The breadth of it is, you know, striking to say the least.
Have you seen any pushback from any of the cities or state attorney generals? I know that there's been a lot of or some protests right now in some of the cities in Austin. And in Austin, we've had some protests, but we also had some of the ICE folks that are rounding up, you know, some of our immigrants, whether they're illegal or not. And there's a great fear in the immigrant communities right now. Some of the students are not going to school. We have teachers who are trying to protect their students. But have you seen any of that? And is anything planned? Any protest? Any more lawsuits?
So I think you're raising a very important question about the ability of people to push back. You know, in terms of the state AGs, I think there are a lot of state AGs that are going to press back, and they're going to defend their states and their cities against cuts off in funding, against the federal government trying to tell them they have to cooperate in immigration enforcement. But in the terms of, you know, resistance, I think it's critical, as you say, that people be out there letting their views known. The one thing that we're being clear-eyed about, although we're going to continue filing lawsuits, is that everything can't be done through the courts. You know, there's just a limit to what you can accomplish. I think in the courts, you can accomplish a lot, but not everything. And it's going to take people pushing back, the public pushing back. I think that's one of the lessons from the family separation lawsuit the first time around, is that people took to the streets, and it wasn't just progressives, it was conservatives, Republicans, Democrats saying, look, maybe we want more strict immigration enforcement, but this is too much to start taking little babies away. And the Pope spoke out, Laura Bush spoke out, everyone spoke out. And I think what we're going to need to do is document the cruelty that's going on and show that mothers are being deported. It's not just all serious criminals. Mothers with little children, U.S. citizen little children, to let the public know what it looks like, mass deportations look like in practice. My own feeling is that when people said they wanted mass deportations or very strict enforcement of the immigration laws, they were sort of voting for an abstract principle. It was too vague. And I think probably a lot of people had this notion that it was going to all be very serious criminals. But I think if they see that they're, mothers who have lived here for 20 years, have been contributing to society, all of a sudden being pulled out of their house, their children ending up in foster care, I'm hoping the American public will say, wait, that's not what we meant. That's going over the line, and push back, because that's going to be absolutely essential. I think in any civil rights movement, not everything can be done through the courts. It needs that public reaction. And so part of our challenge is to show, and the media's challenge, to show and document what's going on so people can see for themselves.
What I hear you saying, Lee, is that this is not the time for people to be on the sidelines. And I know those in our audience, many of us think, well, I'm just one person. What can I do? But I think the answer is you do what you can do. Everybody, and it's my feeling, everybody has a duty to do something.
Yeah.
Public, you can change things. I was a product of the Vietnam era, where half of the college students took to the streets to protest an unjust war. And lo and behold, it applied pressure and saved, thousands and thousands of lives.
Yeah, no, that's such an important point about people getting involved. I mean, what I always say, especially to law students and young people, is don't get overwhelmed by how big the issues are. Don't feel like because you can't solve everything, you shouldn't do anything. Help one family, take one case. And it doesn't matter whether you're an immigration lawyer or in public interest. If you're at a big firm, take a case, do something. It really matters. Every little thing you do matters. And I think you will feel like it matters. The family you help, it will be their entire life, and you'll see that. So don't get overwhelmed by everything. Just do something. Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right, Richard.
And you had touched on the voters, who many were in favor of deportations. It sounded good, and there was some pretty colorful rhetoric attached to that. But I've been reading Reuters has a study where immigrants, either legal or illegal, do not have a higher crime rate than native-born Americans.
Yeah.
And also, there's study after study about how immigration and immigrants are good for America and how they help our economy.
Right.
They can contribute to the prosperity of America. They create jobs. They raise wages. And that's not just for them, but for everybody. And you can see them everywhere. I mean, you can see them in the fast food places, housekeepers cutting your yard, in construction. I see them in construction a lot in my caseload. And even in artificial intelligence, intellectual property. So you're going to have a big gap, it seems like, if they start rounding up immigrants.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I think it's not just pushing back from a civil rights standpoint. I think, businesses need to push back and say, look, this is going to hurt our businesses, it's going to hurt the economy. I think mayors, both parties need to say, look, immigrants have revitalized our communities. I think you're right. Every study shows that immigrants don't commit crimes in greater numbers, and in fact, less less crimes than citizens do. They're contributing to the economy. Every economist says we need immigrant labor. You know, what I always say to people is try not to think about immigration in the abstract. You know, think about the immigrants you know. Do they actually fit the profile that President Trump is putting out there, that all these immigrants are members of gangs and just coming here to leech off our economy? And I think, you know, I get so many calls from people who say, wait, the custodian in my son's school, he's going to be deported. Wait, I didn't think that's what was going to happen. He's such a nice guy. I think people just need to really think about all the immigrants they know, and would you want to see them picked up and removed after living here so long? So you're absolutely right. This is a question of not just civil rights, but just what's good public policy for our country.
You know, the other day I was sharing those surveys with a lawyer friend of mine, and he said, well, let me get this right. If they're good for the economy and they don't commit more crimes than other people, then why are we deporting them? Why are we having mass deportations? And that's pretty much, you know, big question mark, I think, right now in our society. Lee, do you want to wrap it up with any closing thoughts? That you're right in the middle of the fight. And before we leave, it's my understanding that you guys, ACLU has been, and your team have been preparing for this Trump massive deportation for some time now. What are your plans? What's the offensive going to be like?
Yeah, so, you know, the first time around, I think we were caught off guard. We moved very quickly, but we were caught off guard. This time around, we started preparing last winter for the possibility of another Trump presidency. And obviously they came in more prepared, having 4 years to think back on what they did right or wrong the first time around. Our plan is just to keep fighting, you know, whether that's in court, whether it's through advocacy, whether it's generating public opposition. You know, people say, well, are you going to be able to win all these cases? Are you going to be able to change all policies? No, we're not going to win everything, but you have to keep fighting. And I think we need all the support we can get. We've been preparing a long time, you know, there's lots of other NGOs and partners out there who are going to do it. But I think we need lots of individuals stepping up to do stuff. There's just no way around it. They are coming with all their resources. They're moving people from different agencies to do immigration. And so we're going to have to match that somehow, some way. And, you know, this is part of it. I very much appreciate the ABA shining a light on this, because we need to get the word out that we need help, and people can do stuff, and they don't have to be an immigration lawyer to do stuff. They can learn it quickly. And whether it's, you know, a protest, whether it's taking one case, whether it's helping a family do a power of attorney. So if the parent is deported suddenly, there's someone to take care of the child. There's all sorts of ways to help.
I think the takeaway from that comment is to our audience and to the American public is do something. We have a duty as Americans to stand up for our country and for what's right. And certainly those of us that went to law school have a higher duty. Lee, as we are going to be leaving this conversation for today, do you have any parting thoughts? Anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I think you said it well. It's just, you know, do something, push back. You know, immigrants are being scapegoated, as they often are through American history. They are not what's wrong with our country. They're beneficial to our country, and I hope people will stand up for them. And thank you so much for having me, and the ABA for having me.
Well, we can't thank you enough for keeping up the fight and everything that you do, and you get more victories than not, and that's very important to not only our country, but to those individuals that you help. And to everybody else, any other lawyers out there, feel free to join the ABA and join our section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. And remember, everybody's voice is needed. It's important at this time not to hide under the covers, but stay engaged. Don't be on the sidelines. You may never get this opportunity again. Again, thank you very much for being with us. And Lee, thank you and Godspeed.
Thank you.